Welcome to the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast, where we're joined by your hosts, Tania Gomez and Paul Bryan. In each episode, we'll be sharing valuable insights and tips to help you turn your NDIS business into a profitable venture. So whether you're just starting out or looking to take your business to the next level, you've come to the right place. Let's stop surviving and start thriving.
Welcome everybody to the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast. My name is Paul and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Tania Gomez. Tania, how you doing?
I'm wonderful. It's so lovely to be here on the Gold Coast in our first live episode. We were going to do our 100th episode today, but we're not quite there. I think this is episode 87.
87. We didn't churn out like a heap of extra episodes in the meantime, just for the sake of it, did we?
Yeah, we're a little bit behind because we kind of took January and February and March and maybe April off.
Of April as well. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I'm going to blame you for that.
I will 100% take. Apparently there was something happening in this point of the year that it took a lot of my attention. Anyway, amazing. Hey, there's been so much happening in the last few weeks for NDIS around legislation, and there's this awesome dude called Mark Butler who's given us a whole bundle of information with nothing real tangible inside of it, which has really posed a lot more questions than anything else. And I think it'd be great if we could have a bit of a chat around that. We've also got some guys in the room here who are going to poke us with some amazing questions. And so we're going to dive into it. But first, I'd love your quick take on what's been announced and what this looks like for new providers.
Yeah, so April 22, there was obviously an announcement at the press club which really centres around preparing people for the budget. It's kind of where it came from. And it's been interesting watching this space because obviously we've been talking about reform and mandatory registration for so many years now. And we've known about mandatory registration for SIL coming 1st of July. But in typical government format, we started to only see data in budget papers, which is why I think they had to kind of now address it with the budget coming up, because the reduction of the NDIS is what they're saying is going to save the budget. That's kind of like their crown jewel, which is sad and a little bit shocking in itself. But yeah, so 22nd of April, Mark Butler got up at the press club and made a speech about changes, followed by a government webpage and fact sheet that talked about a little bit more detail. And there's a few main things that stood out for me. There's this idea of commissioning, which was announced for the first time. It's not something that we had heard in those words before. This idea that support coordinators and plan managers will be fully moved to a commissioned function, commencing in October 27 and beginning in July 28. So that's interesting. They also said that SIL will move to a commissioned model. So in my head, a commissioned model is similar to what they do for the LACs. It's a tender type approach. They wouldn't be providers then, so they wouldn't be funded under the NDIS potentially. Not sure how the funding will work. But similar to a LAC, the funding is there for a 3 to 5 year period, and there's criteria that they have to meet. There's KPIs that they have to meet, and there's rules and guidelines specifically for people who win that. In previous businesses that I've had, we run a lot of government tenders and a lot of government work, and there's lots of panels in lots of other industries. So in the RTO space, there's different panels for different state-based funding, and this is kind of commonplace. So it's actually just the first time we've heard about it in NDIS, and it's the first time it's ever been mentioned for SIL. Support coordination and plan management, I think we've been seeing that foreshadowed for quite some time. We've been told about navigators, but we hadn't been clear. I had a few people who are clients and friends who were in the room at the press club who were texting me updates as the day progressed. One of them is a plan manager who sent me a 4-letter text as that was announced. And their thoughts are that it'll go down to being 10 large plan management companies and probably 10 large support coordination companies run under a tender, very similar to the LAC. As you said in the beginning of the show, it's all hearsay though. We have no detail about who, where, when, what that looks like. But it's interesting to note the wording around there. The question this brings up for me is really around small businesses and viability for small businesses in the space. What does this look like if you're a small business? How can you be selected as one of the elite 10? What does that look like? What would put you ahead? Is it a matter of forming groups and doing consortia, which is done in lots of government applications? That's kind of what I'm thinking is how do we actually transition to that? How do we give people the best chance to be considered? And then what does this mean for the people who aren't one of the 10?
There's a whole bundle of stuff in there, and obviously this all has to go through legislative change and has to be passed through several areas of government, and this means, for one thing, they've put a time frame on it. Number two, it usually means the time frame is going to blow out. But three, there's a lot of time for things to change or things to be clarified. And so I look at this and go, yeah, they've probably given us what they want as the ideal, and whether or not they've sort of last second thrown a cushion underneath the budget to kind of give us a bit of a prep on what they're planning. But this is we've seen this before several times with the NDIS, where they kind of go, this is where we're going, and then it gets probably diluted a few times through some different stages, and we ended up with something that is going to be very laid back rollout over a period of time. When we look at plan managers and support coordinators, that's been on the radar for a very, very long time in regards to that being up in the air. We saw the price hold and the registration, the mandatory registration hold on those areas as well, because it was a last minute change, I'm guessing, to go, oh, they should be registered, and go, oh, hang on, but we're going to change the whole model, so there's no point.
There was a lot of consultation around that, and I believe it would make sense to me that the consultation would have said, why are we making them all go and spend 20 grand to get registered if we're just going to delete them in 2 years' time? That's almost cruel and unusual punishment, no?
I feel like they're really good at that, though. So, look, that probably would have ended up in a whole bundle of legal proceedings to the government anyway.
It's just mean, I guess. There's just no purpose to it.
No.
If you're talking, the reason you would have mandatory registration is for transparency, but they're shifting transparency by going to a commissioned panel. Because when you are releasing a government tender, you give criteria, people agree to it, and at any time, if you don't think they're meeting it, you cancel their contract instantly. There's none of this audit, complying, checking, warnings. There's none of that. It is just simply, we're closing you today. And so actually a tender model gives them quite a lot more clout or authority or around them. They don't have to go through multiple lots of legislation. If a provider fails an audit, they get another chance. They get 90 days. They get, there's multiple options where if you're under a tender, you've breached the tender, or we just don't like you anymore, they can just axe anything overnight. Yep. So I think for them that makes a lot more sense. For me, I think the regulator's sitting there thinking, holy crap, there's 200,000 providers. We've just told everyone they need to register. Are we going to have to regulate 200,000 providers? They're certainly not equipped to do that. They're not. The systems can't do that. No. We've got 16,000 registered providers now, and the Commission is busy.
They can't manage that.
They can't manage what they have. So how are they going to make everyone be registered? And I know that 200,000 number is very up for debate. I've heard stats like 100,000 are sole traders or independent support workers, so there's really only 100,000, and maybe they're people who have claimed once or twice, people who are selling products. So it's really hard to know exactly what the number is. But even if we say they're going to increase to 30,000 registered providers, that's still doubling the amount of regulation that they do now. So it's still a huge amount of investment in staff, in resources, in systems. It seems way easier from their perspective to move them to a different regulatory model where they can just cancel you overnight whenever they like at their discretion. Makes a lot of sense, I think.
We've just talked obviously about support coordination moving to a different model and plan management there, but you also mentioned about SIL and a bit of a change there as well. But SIL are going through mandatory registration. That really looks to me like they are actually trying to bring down the numbers, because there's plenty of providers who don't want to register for whatever reason, or they're looking at, well, if we can bring this in, that's going to help us consolidate a lot of those into a smaller number of businesses that we actually can manage. And so it's interesting that they're bringing that in now, considering that is probably a much larger scope than even just support coordination.
Yeah, I think still does not make sense that it could ever be unregistered to me. It's the most vulnerable group of people. It makes no sense. It makes sense in the context of they had all of this legacy, all of these people in group homes that they had to transition quickly, and they were worried that they weren't going to have enough resources to move the current people who needed supports. But for new providers entering the market, or for new participants getting diagnosis or getting to the age where they need to move out, it should have been mandatory all along. The risk factors, and there's been so many commissions, reviews, insights into group houses for decades, well before the NDIS thing, that all tell us that it's the biggest setting for abuse and exploitation for people. The statistics are actually just really shocking. So for me, that makes sense. I think what they're going to do is, I don't think they can do both though. They can't make SIL have all these new higher standards at the same time be moving to a commissioning process, because again, just the extra effort in that just seems like a wasted effort, time, energy, money for everybody. So I think that they have said that July 26, they're starting consultation around a commissioning approach to address provider viability challenges. So I'm not even really sure what that means, other than we've kind of half thought about this. We're going to go and see what other people think. The other thing that's really quite clear to me by watching a few different changes over the years is that the agency like to throw things out there and see what sticks. Yep. They like to see what people get up in arms about. You know, we saw this when there was a change probably in 2020. In 2020, when the NDIS Commission came out, if you were a proprietary limited company, you had a different audit process than you were a sole trader. And they changed, OT Australia, Speech Pathology Australia came out and said this makes absolutely no sense. If we've got an OT who's a company with a one person and in a sole trader as a one person, what's the risk difference? Yep. So they changed that. They rolled it out and rolled it back. Yep. We saw that with art therapists and music therapists. They rolled out a change, they peeled it back. So I think some of this is just, let's test the appetite. What's going to pass the pub test? What's going to have all the disability advocates up in arms? And then they can strategically pick the things that they think are going to win them an election.
And that's it. So much of this, we've seen the NDIS is being used as, you know, the political football. It's going backwards and forwards. Who's going to own it? Who's going to reform it? Who's going to make Johnny taxpayer as happy as possible about the NDIS, because the publicity around it has generally not been good. And so, you know, obviously the idea of bringing more regulation, because the general populace see it as an entirely unregulated area where people are, you know, being paid $1 million a year to take someone to the movies, right? And this is the narrative that goes out there. So every time the government is bringing out these things, they're also trying to save face in regards to where they're spending the dollar. I'd love to pop this out. If anyone has a question, I'm going to ask Tania one more question. If you've got a question, I'd love you to throw your hand up so I know that someone out there. But Tania, as you quickly Googling there, is absolutely amazing. That was a very quick one-handed Googling. What's your take? Like, there was a lot of up in the air stuff. What's your take on the timeline from what you've seen before?
I think there's some things that they need legislation to be changed on to change. That is a slow process. But there's some things within their control already that sit in guidelines or sit in lower documents than legislation, like the practice standards, that they can change at any time. So practice standards are a lower level government document. They don't need to go through upper and lower house. Their legislation sets there will be standards. The commission then have the ability to change that. So they could roll out changes at multiple levels quite quickly, and it sounds like potentially that's what they will do. They'll make the lower changes that they can quickly, and then there's some changes that are going to have to go through multiple rounds of legislation, consultation, etc. I think things like where they direct their budgets, I don't believe that needs to legislative change. So the idea of this dramatic cut in community access budget. So The comments were something like, this stream of funding grew from 4 billion to 12 billion in 5 years. We're now going to reset that, and they want to now basically move that back to 4 billion from the 12 billion. So they're cutting that. I think they could do that quite quickly, and all they would need to do is, as new plans are getting reviewed or approved, just reduce the budget. So I think that is likely to see something we'll see happen quite quickly. 30% cut to plan managers. Again, I think that's something they could do quite quickly, is just start capping. I think we've already started to see that there's more and more plans that are coming out as self and agency managed, and the amount of plan managed is becoming smaller. And they've said that it'll be 90% agency managed. So they can control that pretty quickly. When I started 13 years ago, when we're trying to sell people registration, the sales team, not so much me, but the sales team used to say, "Oh, look, you really, you really need to, be agency managed because there's only 10% that are self and plan managed." So when we started, it was 10%, but now it's the other way. So for them to bring that back won't be difficult. So I think that's something that we'll see quite quickly. I think mandatory registration's a no-brainer. We'll start to see that, and they can change things like the enrolment processes. None of that needs to go through legislation. I believe they might need to change like the AQA rules, the auditor rules legislation, so they might need to change some of those. But I think they're amendments, not new legislation, so I think that's a faster process again. So yeah, I think timeframes, I think we'll see budget starting to change quite quickly. So I think the focus for providers is, how do we do less with more?
Yeah, 100%.
How do we do more with less?
More with less, yes. Awesome. I'd love to throw it open. Has anybody got any questions around the changes that have been announced and how this sort of applies to your business at all? Yeah, Lisa.
Vanessa, if you had a loved one who is looking at going into SIL for the first time, would you recommend that your loved one hang off for a little bit, or would you be saying to your loved one, go for it? Right now, with the changes and the uncertainty and the fear in the community.
I think if I knew a good SIL provider, I would say to get in there, because if you don't use your funding, it's likely to be removed, is my pessimistic viewpoint. They have already talked about figures and numbers not being able to roll over if you haven't used it to future funding points. So I think if you need SIL and you want that funding, that I would be optimising my SIL budget, and I would be spending every cent of my budget moving forwards.
I think it's going to be a lot easier to be in the system than to enter the system over the next couple of years.
And I think that for providers, I think providers should generally get in there, because it's always a different process to transition than it is to start anew.
Yeah, that was where I was sort of looking at, if there is a need still in SIL for providers, are they better off to wait and grow, or grow now and act later?
I think you grow when you have the demand and you have the resources and structure. For me, growth is always around the right opportunity at the right time. And if you have the resources and the team and a participant needs you, it's the perfect time. I'm not sure I'd go and retrofit all of the resources to deliver SIL until I had the demand. I see that's where people go wrong. You have houses sitting empty for ages.
Yeah.
You've decided you have this perfect house in a perfect place and no one ever wants to live there, and you've spent thousands of dollars on a year's worth of rent, and you've hired staff and gone through that cost that you might not need yet. And I've done that many times in business as well. You think, there's going to be this big demand, I'm going to resource appropriately. I've kind of learned over time it's better to stretch myself and my team a little bit and pop people in when they're absolutely needed, as opposed to try and retrofit for something that's coming. I like to be super organised, but you just have people sitting around, and then people get used to that level of activity, and then you don't have the demand, and then kind of things fall apart. So I prefer to meet the market wherever you can, from a minimisation of risk, cost, resources, effort for reward.
I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity over the next little while for people that are established in a certain area, whether it be SIL or whatever it is, to be ready and available for businesses that are going, this is too hard, or I'm too scared, or whatever it might be. but also remembering, looking at the clients that you're working with, is this going to be viable in the coming years of the NDIS as well?
And I don't think the change to commissioning for SIL is something that is going to happen quickly, and we don't even know if it's going to happen, what that's going to look like, how many providers. There's so many SIL houses. How can it be 10 providers? It just doesn't make, you know, we might as well go back to block-funded model. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
That feels like one of the things that they're testing the waters with.
Yeah.
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 100%.
Tony has a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a question for you, Tania, but like you see a lot of these providers, SIL providers that aren't registered, and do you reckon they're gonna allow those providers to piggyback off providers that are registered, just so that they can keep their SIL
Brokerage.
things like that, brokerage, yeah.
Mm.
Because I feel that in the market that we are now, and with them coming out that every SIL provider has to be registered, people are going to go, oh, well, I'll just piggyback off, you know, someone else's that I'm sort of in with. And then there's nothing really going to be changing.
So anyone that I know that's done brokerage, after a certain point in time, can't understand why they're paying somebody else all this money and being left with a tiny margin. So I don't think brokerage is something you would do long term. I understand its place, and I'm not against it at all. I think partnering with people is how you can expand your capacity, definitely. But I have clients constantly who come to me and say, I need to get registered because I'm working under somebody else's agreement. And then, you know, the next phone call, can you help me buy a company so I can take over today? I no longer can wait the 6 months for registration because I'm being bled dry with the amount I'm paying the other provider. Not just the amount that they're paying, but they, in their head, there's also just many business conflicts that occur. You know, a participant gets hurt, whose work covers that under? A staff member leaves, whose responsibility is that? A reportable incident needs to be done, who's lodging that? The auditor is coming, whose staff are they interviewing? There's too many things that people haven't, not all the time. I know there's some people that do brokerage really well, but often they haven't really thought it through. They've just gone, oh yeah, you just do the service agreement, I'll do everything else and we'll split the money. But there's so many disagreements that happen in that it's not something that's sustainable long term. The models that go long term are things like licensing and things like franchises that have really clear legal agreements, really clear resources, really clear reasons why you would work under a franchise or under a license. They're quite different than this brokerage of kind of, you know, sharing responsibility. And I think brokerage should be for a short-term period while you wait for own registration, or because a client of yours has increased needs all of a sudden. But my honest opinion is, if you're doing SIL, you should just be registered. I think the government doesn't hate the idea of brokerage because they don't care. They're regulating the registered provider, and the registered provider then is holding the risk. And then the registered provider almost acts as a regulator to the people underneath them. And I don't think they mind that because they can just blame one person then rather than blaming 10. For full transparency, in a previous career, I had brokerage agreements. I was an RTO, and we had brokerage arrangements. We had about 80 providers broker under us and use our funding and our registration. And we had very stringent rules and things in place. And we acted like the regulator, and that definitely helped our business grow. And we helped run classrooms of students in places that otherwise couldn't get teachers in those areas. So it made sense. We had the funding, we had a brand, they had a community, they had locations, and we could do that quite well. So I think that definitely worked there, but there's still so many business implications. And when you're talking high risk, in a classroom, there's a few risks, but not nearly as many as there are in a SIL environment. So I think there's just too many risks there for my liking for it to be a long-term thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like using agency staff for 2 years straight. Like, you can do it, but no one's getting paid anything valuable. There's no margin in the business to operate. And so, as Tania said, it can be a stopgap measure for those situations. Businesses have been doing that, and there are people providing that sort of thing. And whether or not they're doing it under a really stringent model of reporting and making sure everything's done right, or if it's just, hey, sure, you know, let's figure this out over a coffee and you'll just go and run with it, it's going to become probably less viable. over the next little while, especially, if people are subsidising some of their SIL with some community access, that's going to be a little harder to do as well. We're probably going to see this, that type of model more so get taken by savvy providers who are ready for merger and acquisition and ready to say, look, no, but would you like to come and be the operations manager of those 5 houses that you want me to broker with you?
And I've seen more mergers and acquisitions in the last 6 months than I've seen in the last 13 years combined. Like the amount of work I'm doing of due diligence for purchases is extraordinarily high. The big providers are acquiring providers. That is a whole business model out there. And especially distressed businesses. So there's whole business models out there that do that, and I think we will just start to see consolidation, and we may end up in a space where we have, the big 200 providers in the country, and that's kind of where it stays. I'm not sure.
Well, we've also seen a lot of businesses just absorbing businesses because they've closed down. We literally had one of our guys in Profitable Provider who, on a Thursday got a call from someone and said, I'm closing on Monday. Have you got room to take on 30 clients and staff? And that was a busy week.
Yeah.
But, they had actually built up the rapport. They did very similar services, and every single one of those 30 clients was offered whether or not they want to come across. And if not, they found, they made suggestions and support workers worked with them. And the two businesses actually worked together to find placements for everybody. But at the end of the day, this business took on 20 clients in 5 days.
Yeah, I had a client in Victoria who took on 35 new SIL houses over the Easter weekend for a provider who was a not-for-profit provider who decided to exit the space and decided to exit. And so they did a transition plan. There was no purchase involved. The participants were given a choice, but the participants, decided that they would all like to stay with the same providers in this group of houses they had, and they all transitioned over. So it still means it's another reason why your reputation, your network, all of those things are important, because if someone you consider your competitor is sitting there and they know you do good things and they care about their participant, they'll go, oh, who do we know that can care for our participants like we would? Let's give them a call in the first instance.
I think this comes a lot down to what are you doing as a business owner in the realm of education, in the realm of bringing people together, and in the realm of even your personal brand, where people build trust with you, because then you can actually have those conversations because they'll come to you for those types of things. Any other questions? Yeah.
Why the mass exodus? Why are they exiting?
Providers?
Yeah.
Why are they exiting?
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to be a provider. Why are they exiting? I think mandatory registration is really scary. If you've been running a business and you have 10 participants and you've been getting by with a 4% profit margin for the last few years, and you've heard that registration's hard and it's about to cost you $10,000 every 18 months, you're just doing the maths in your head. I met with a firm that help businesses when they're in financial distress recently. And they said that they've never had more calls. They wanted to know about NDIS. They asked me to teach them about NDIS because they'd never had so many calls from NDIS providers who had, especially with payday super coming in. Lots of people I have in my previous lives, previous businesses, use super as a bit of a cash flow, right? But now payday super is one more stretch. You have this bill number 2 coming out that puts personal liability on directors of companies, up $10-20 million personally. Something goes wrong in your business, a participant tragically gets injured or dies, and you personally lose $20 million. The risk is actually quite high. And what the firm said to me as previous to NDIS, they had done a lot of work with tradies, and they said that they did a lot of maths with tradies, and in almost every case, the tradie was better off working for someone else. Not just a little bit. They would get 4 times more if they worked for someone else than what they were bringing in, and they didn't have the risk. So if you're sitting there as an independent support worker and things have been pretty cushy, you've been getting 60, 70, 80, 90, whatever an hour, that's a lot of money. And then all of a sudden you're going to have to be registered, and that's going to drop in half, and you're going to have double the responsibility. I know, stacking shelves at Woolworths sounds pretty good.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you look at this and go, I've had so many conversations with providers that say, I'm tired, I'm burnt out, This is getting way too tight. I'm backwards, 6 months of the year, and I'm barely making it the other 6 months of the year. And I actually have to say I've said to probably 10 business owners this year, would you like to just be a manager at a provider where you get to 9 to 5 it pretty much, and then you can let the owner deal with all the extra stuff that you're currently dealing with, and they go, holy crap, that sounds amazing. Right? And so to your question there, people are going to go, yeah, actually, I don't know if I'm actually up for this next stage.
And the truth is that you get burnt out and tired doing this for a while, running a business for a while, and it's lonely as well. And if you don't have a good community of people to lean on, you just go a little bit crazy. Like you kind of lose it a little bit. It becomes really quite difficult. And I've had that a number of times in my life. My first business I started when I was 21. By the time I was 27, it was a very huge business, 1,000 staff. I had no idea what I was doing most of the time. But when I went to sell that business, I had kind of run it into the ground because I was so burnt out. I was so exhausted, and we were doing great services, and the business was great, and I was so proud, and everyone was like, wow, you're doing so well. And I was like, well, then why am I crying myself to sleep every night? Why is it that I can't take a holiday? And my husband took over my business, and I went back to full-time work, and it was a holiday. And he ran my business for the last year until we could actually sell it and exit it. But burnout is a real thing. And I think people feel like they have to have the answers. And when they realise that they don't have enough cash to pay staff next week, they feel really responsible. Yep. And then they can't get out of the hole. So I think there's no harm in saying it's just now a little bit too tough for me and I'm going to go try something else. It was a great experiment. For me, I sold my business. I went back and worked for someone else for 8 years until I was recharged enough to think I could do it again. And I was equally as fulfilled in that other role. I used to tell everyone that they're paying me to learn my next set of skills because it was someone else that couldn't sleep at night. I would go and do the best I can, but I wasn't worried about the P&L or paying staff or any of those things. Yeah. So I think there's time, and I'll talk about this in my talk tomorrow, but there's times and stages in your life where you have the time and capacity to push 100%, but as you have young children, aging parents, other priorities in life, sometimes it just makes more sense to go back. And a lot of people have just bought themselves a job. Yeah, they're not taking they're not making millions of dollars, they're not making thousands of dollars in profit. They would make the same I'm a teacher, but going back to teaching, if I'm going to make the same and I have 9 to 3 and I have school holidays off, that starts to look really appealing again.
Yeah, 100%. The entrepreneurial journey is full of all sorts of ups and downs, if we were to put some jargon into it, but in the reality of it, I've had businesses really fail, but I've also been able to take some really cool lessons from that, apply that to the next thing, and I've had 7 businesses, of which 4 have miserably failed and cost me a lot of money at some stages as well. But I've had other businesses which have done exceedingly well based off the lessons that I've learned. And I think one of the things that's really easy is to assume that the one thing we're doing right now and the one way we're doing it is the only way it's ever going to work and the only thing that I can ever do. Because there are so many ways that you can do what you're doing now. And we even spoke about that in session 1 yesterday, where we looked at what is the thing that I actually do and that I actually want to do, and how do I create a business around that? Because there's people who are going to find this next stage really difficult, and there's people who are going to work with those people, and they're going to then go on and go, right, my business is going to grow at this point. Because when, you've probably heard me say this a million times, when things get hard, less people do it. And so there's always opportunity in this area as well. When the stock market goes down, the smart people buy. Right? All these areas where we start to look at what is the next opportunity, because it's not necessarily going to look the same as it has for the last little while.
And a government-regulated space is a really good first business to have as well, because you kind of have supply and demand sorted out. So you can learn other business skills and then you can apply that somewhere else as well. Profit margins in NDIS, as we know, are quite small. Someone tried to tell me they were the same as every business, and I knew that wasn't true, so I did some research, and the only other business that has a 2 to 4% profit margin is actually hospitality. So cafes is the only other business at a 2 to 4% profit margin. Professional services fits at 15 to 30%. Most businesses, sit 15 to 30%, and then mining and other huge companies sit at 50% profit. But 4% profit, one hiccup, and your buffer's gone. So we'll talk a little bit about it in my session tomorrow about what we can kind of do to move past some of those things. But I think it's a reality of the pricing structures. Interestingly, back to the minister, the minister has been talking about differentiated pricing and having different prices for registered versus unregistered, which I received a lot of hate on LinkedIn when I posted about it. It's like I had made it up.
Yeah. Is that your fault?
I don't know. Someone
Probably
actually wrote, "I've never met you, but I hate you."
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad it's not me now. Awesome.
Wow. I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just asking what people's opinions were. I
Yep.
did not make up this idea." But for me, it kind of makes sense. Different cost base, different reward. And the only thing that drives behaviour is money, right? So I must say, since the announcement, I've never had more people trying to get registered right now so they don't get a price difference, which is, interesting.
Yeah, that's going to be very interesting. Dave, you had a question.
Yes, around the minister and the politicians. Like, for me, it seems like they've thrown one to see where it sticks, and then they're now testing to see what the Senate's going to do. And you've seen it in aged care, and you've seen it where they've rolled back the client contribution. They're not rolling it back to October. They're not rolling it back to October, but they're rolling it back because of people have complained. I feel in the SIL space, there needs to be regulation, right? It's a very important job that we do as SIL providers. And I think what they've done, you can get your opinion on, is that they've thrown the mud to get rid of the crap. That's what they're trying to force out, these unregistered providers who are giving us all a bad name. And this is the way they're going to figure out how to do it. Because we've already got Jordan Steele coming out saying, you're not getting rid of sport coordinators. I'll send it to committee every day until you kill it. So he's one of the ones that's going, sign his petition, I signed it last night, about saying, I'm going to fight for the NDIS, because he lives it every day.
We've seen this happen before in different ways, and the government is not opposed to using guerrilla warfare in parts of these stages, because when we saw that they were talking about reducing the numbers or making it a bit harder for plan managers and support coordinators, the first thing they did was issue a letter that every single one got saying, we're watching you. Guess what? I've never seen so many plan managers and support coordinators decide to shut up shop just because they got a letter in the mail saying we're watching you, right? And then they made things just a little bit harder by not having a price rise. And it's just this idea of being able to just push the needle just a little bit further to make it a bit harder. And that's exactly right.
Make it untenable.
Make it untenable. It's not viable to run this business anymore. I'm out. And so, it might get to the point where we start to look at, what does real quantity look like and what does that have to be measured at? But I can tell you right now, there are supervisors out there operating at quantity who are still operating at 2% profit margin, right? So looking at what that is going to be in the next stage will be really interesting, because people are going to find it more difficult.
Helen?
Do you think we'll see changes with registered providers and unregistered providers in the next price guide?
I hope so. I think it probably can. They do lots of things in price guides. Price guide is something they don't need any legislation to change, right? So it's a mechanism they have. So you always think of everything as carrot and stick, right? That's the carrot. That's the carrot to be registered. For so long, people have said to me, so why am I getting registered again? And so that's a really big,
For the longest time, it really hasn't been necessary.
No.
For so many, obviously for some it is, but for so many it's not. But they could literally, at the next price guide, just kind of go, yeah, you guys get $1 and you guys lose $1.
Yeah.
Or it could be 10.
And I spoke to someone recently who had spent 15 years at the NDIA in a policy level, and I was like asking him everything that I could really think of. I was like, surely we have to be like paying SIL providers more. We're talking about the SIL Summit. He's talking at the SIL Summit. I was like, surely we have to be paying them more. He's like, there is no more. And I was like, well, there's more. No, there's no more. They're not getting more. What they're going to do is standardise everyone's plan. So every SIL plan will be the same dollar amount. And some people will lose and some people win, but they see it as an overcorrection. They actually feel like people have received too much money for too much time. Internally, the rhetoric is we're going back because there hasn't been a standardised assessment that a plan manager, or I don't know the name of these people who make these decisions, whatever they are called, if they're having a great day, you'll get $2 million. If they're having a bad day, you'll get $1 million. And there's no rhyme or reason. They don't need to justify it anywhere. So as an auditor, my report goes to another auditor to check what I've said. If it's a major or minor non-conformity, was I right? There's no cross-check that's being done. So you have this, and also, we all know that if you have a good support coordinator, you get more funding for your participant. So some people have amazing plans and some people don't. So they're going to standardise plans, and that's how they're going to save money, is they're going to rob Peter to pay Paul, essentially.
And you can either go, this is really upsetting, or you could learn how to play the game. And that's going to be a really important stage for the next stage of business to go, right, this is what it's going to look like now in the future. How do we make this work? Louise, you had a question.
Yeah, it was just about the different pricing between registered and unregistered. Then there's going to be a massive shift in CAS then, where people are going to want to utilise their plan more and go to unregistered. So if you're right view on that side, it's going to be hard, I guess.
Well, that's why they're going to do 90% of people agency managed.
They will have to be. It's sort of forcing the hand, essentially.
So you don't have to be registered. So only SIL and, has to be registered on 1st of July, but we're going to now differentiate pricing. So sure, don't get registered. Choose your independent support worker.
All the choice of control you like, as long as you choose this one.
Yeah.
Basically. We've got one more question over here.
Yesterday, you threw out a statistic that I'm still struggling to digest. You said that 14% of Australians with disabilities are on the scheme. My question is, if only 14% are on the scheme, and we are trying to reduce that, are we quietly redefining who is deserving of supports, as opposed to delivering something with equality across the board?
This might be unpopular, but it was never designed for everyone.
Yeah, the minister made it quite clear in his plan, in his speech. He talks a number of times about how it wasn't meant for everybody. He also kind of insinuated that doctors are giving out diagnoses that maybe aren't needed, and that we're over-prescribing things was an undertone that I picked up on. And so, I think that's where the Thriving Kids came from, that NDIS wasn't actually meant for early intervention. It was supposed to be for high complex clients, and we have a lot of people who aren't high complex who are on the scheme. So I think you're likely to see it, but hopefully the states do pick up and have other services like we had before. The question that I just have there is, what happens to providers then? Because the providers, they're just going to take the staff that you trained to go into the government agencies to do this, as opposed to being run privately, which then isn't the demand-driven system and the system that we talked about. It's kind of the end of this demand-driven model and really going back to a really finite choice.
But also we're looking at the difference between need and deserving. I think everyone is deserving of some sort of support and network. In my opinion, that's how I see entrepreneurship. Is how can I create a process or a business or a system that will provide a service, be whatever that means. And so looking at that as well is going to be really, really important. Yes, okay, just literally one more.
On July 1st, if you were to guesstimate numbers of SIL organisations
Well, you're on the spot.
would be registered or not, what would happen to their participants? Would they go to their partner companies that they've formed a relationship with, or will there be a flood, or would it just be like...
So the rules are from the 1st of July. So you have to do your application. You have to start the process from the 1st of July. And we don't have complete details, but the consultation papers suggested a 3-month window to do your application from July and a 12-month process to do your audit. So you would have 15 months to then be, and then however long it takes the commission So it's not you have to have registration on the 1st of July, it's you have to have started the process. And this is how every time we've transitioned the scheme, it's been the same. You have a date to do an application, same as you're doing your renewal audit. You have a date to do the application, you have a date to finish your audit by. So it'll be a similar process. At the end of that rollout, what I've seen the Commission do, if you are implementing a restrictive practice, they send out a letter to their unregistered provider saying, we have identified that you are servicing someone with a behaviour support plan. You need to be registered to do that. We're going to give you 3 months to start that process, or you need to transition these participants, and they give them their names. So I see quite a lot of those letters for, really small businesses that might have one participant in a still house 24/7, and it's been 2 independent support workers, and all the independent support workers get these letters. That person has a restrictive practice, you're implementing it, you now have 3 months to go through the process or transition them elsewhere. And there's usually wording in the letter to the effect of, don't stop servicing them right now. Make sure that they are transitioned.
Yep.
Contact us if you need more time to transition them. So they don't want you simply cutting and leaving. They want to make sure that you're transitioning and that those participants aren't at risk of harm. I really do think that they just expect that if one SIL provider stops operating, another will just come in and save the day.
Pretty much, yeah. I see all of this, maybe I'm depressingly optimistic, but I see opportunity. And at every one of these stages, you can either look at it and go, this is terrible, the sky is falling, or we can look at it, how can I create something that is going to actually fill this gap here, fill a hole? And whether or not it's a government funding base or a not-for-profit base, or you just find investors, or whatever the process is that you go by, right? There are solutions, and some of the greatest businesses have been born from massive need in the market, and that's what we're looking at. So there's a massive opportunity for businesses to step up and create new pathways for support.
And that's how diamonds are formed.
That is how diamonds are formed. Beautiful. And on that note, would you like to do the exit today, or you do the close? Tanya's going to do the close.
Yeah, has everyone subscribed? Should we make everyone subscribe?
Like and subscribe. Yeah, you guys should totally like and subscribe.
Please. It's actually our 3rd year anniversary. I just had my LinkedIn tell me. We've been doing this for 3 years. Can you believe that?
That is so cool. That has been a long time.
Crazy. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us today. It's been awesome. We release podcasts every second Tuesday, I think it is. They're all available, all completely free. Tell a friend, and we hope we'll do this again.
Listen, like, share. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here today.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Profitable NDIS Provider podcast with Tania Gomez and Paul Bryan. We hope you found today's episode informative and valuable. If you enjoyed the show, please don't forget to subscribe, leave us a rating, and share it with others who could benefit from our insights. Until next time, keep thriving.